Hello, I'm Carey, and welcome back to Level 1 Sewing. You'll remember in the first episode, I introduced you to the pattern, and here he is again, our wonderful little shirt pattern. In the second episode, I talked about fabric, and I actually have a change to make there. Remember, if you watched it, I said that I was going to be using a jersey fabric for the shirt. I decided to change my mind, of course, because prerogative. I've got two different kinds of fabric. I know they look exactly the same from there, that I'm going to be working with. One is a cotton broadcloth. If you'll remember, we talked about that as being very user-friendly, very lightweight. It's also, well, cotton, which means it breathes, and that's something that's very important for us. We're going to be using that on the body of the shirt. We also have this right here, which is a very lightweight poly blend stuff. It's not really a lining material. It's somewhere a little bit heavier than that, and it's certainly not a satin. I can't tell if you can see the sheen of it, but it's another just lightweight material. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it looks a little bit crisper, a little bit nicer, and remember, we want our vampire to look like a gentleman, if you remember me mentioning it being for a vampire. So this is going to be for the sleeves. The reason that I had to change is I was always planning on using something different for the body of the shirt, just so it would be more comfortable. Well, the fabric I'd picked for the sleeves did not match this. So I had to find something that did, because having colors that don't match is painful to look at unless you intend for them not to match. And that's something I may go into later. That's more of a design aspect than really a sewing technicality. But that's something that I wanted to make sure you knew before we got any further. I didn't want you looking at the fabric going, my God, that's different. Have I lost my mind? Don't worry, you haven't. I did that on purpose. Now, so we've talked about the pattern, we've talked about the fabric. Today we're going to be putting the two together. Isn't that exciting? Finally making progress on this. If there's any of this talking about the pattern that I'm going to be doing that doesn't make sense, refer back to episode 1. At any point in time, just stop this one, go back to that, and then pick this one back up. It's fine. You can reference back and forth like that. I won't be offended. So the first thing we're going to need to do is get our pattern pieces out and together. Remember, I told you the pattern actually has more pieces in it than you're really going to need for the project. So we'll just do ourselves that first big favor and separate out all of the pattern pieces that we know we need. We are planning to do view A. I can't actually remember if I mentioned that, but that's the view we're going to be doing. It has all of the lovely ruffles and lace, and that's what we want. So what we do is come over here to this panel. This shows you what the individual pieces actually look like, and it gives you a list of what those pieces are for. So we just go down the list and find our pieces. Piece 1 is the front, and every single version of the shirt has a front. So we'll just pull that over here. You'll notice that this is a little different than the onion skin. I mentioned that this is a pattern piece, or a pattern that I use quite a lot. It has gotten used so much that we just traced new variations of some of the more common pieces, which are incidentally the front, and number 4, which is the back. And I have that one, right here. Now then, next we have front facing for male, and that is number 2, because our vampire is a male. And now I'm going to take the time to show you how these patterns actually are printed out. I slayed that down backwards. Okay, can you see? We have lots and lots of number 2. We have all the number 2. What the difference is the size. Extra small, small, so on and so forth. And you can actually see them getting bigger as we go. The size I'm making is extra large. So we cut out the extra large number 2. Can you tell this is perhaps not the variation that I make most often? So there we go. There's our number 2. So we've got 1, 2, and 4. Number 3 is the front facing for female, which we incidentally don't need because we have the male variation. 5 is the collar, and I'm going to take a moment to show you a difference in how these pattern pieces work. I just showed you pattern piece number 2, and how it had all of those different pieces. Well, this is pattern piece number 5, and you'll see that it's got all of these lines going out to the side. There's actually only one pattern piece number 5, and it has all of the size variations on the same pattern piece. You find both of these methods all over the place. It just depends on the type of piece that it is, how easily it can be done this way. More often than not, they will try and do them like this, especially the simple patterns, just because it takes less space to print this sort of pattern piece than it does to print the same thing 5 or 6 times. So there we have this one. Now, if you're wanting to use a smaller size, like if you wanted to make a small or medium shirt rather than extra large, you can actually just cut the pattern right on off at that line. It's not really going to hurt anything. I generally don't, just because I have a bad habit of reusing the same pattern over and over again for different size people. Now we've also got 6 is the sleeve. I have it over here somewhere already. I believe that's it. All folded up and ready to go. Yep, number 6. Well, number 9. There we go, number 6. Okay, the next thing is going to be laying out the fabric. And remember I said the pattern actually gives you examples or suggestions for how to lay out the pattern pieces to cut them. And if you look close, you'll see how it has all of them on a fold. There's a reason for that, and we'll get into it when I lay it out. But we're not actually going to worry about all those. I'm going to make up my own layout. Don't worry, it's okay. I don't have one long piece of fabric that I'm working with. I'm working with 2 pieces. So we've got to vary this up just a little bit. And now we have our fabric that we're fixing to pin to. You see, maybe, that I have it folded. This is the sleeve fabric. We're going to be starting with that, just because we can. And now, there are several really good reasons for folding it. First of all, it's easier because it just comes off the bolt that way. You don't have to unfold it and lay it out flat. Another reason is that you have to do less cutting, because when you cut it on the fold, you're cutting 2 pieces at once. Yay for being lazy. And then probably the most important reason is you get the perfect mirrored pieces like you need. Let me explain that. So if you remember when I talked about either fabric or the pattern, I mentioned right and wrong sides. It actually discusses that in the pattern. It references right and wrong side. You want the right side, or the pretty side, of your fabric on the outside of the garment. That just makes sense, right? This kind of fabric doesn't really have a right or wrong side. It's got a lovely duplicity like that. But if you've got, I'm just going to grab an example. If you've got a fabric like this one, let's say, here's one side, here's the other side. It's very obvious which side's right and which side's wrong. One's quite pretty and one's quite ugly. You want to make sure that the pretty side is on the outside of everything. That seems fairly obvious and straightforward. The place where it gets tricky is in the fact that these patterns don't give you more than one piece. They don't give you every single, excuse me, I said that wrong. They don't give you every single individual piece you need. They'll give you one pattern piece, and then you have to cut it out multiple times. Yeah, so, like with the sleeve, where'd my sleeve go? No, how about we do it with the front? Okay, now this is not actually a piece you have to cut two of, but for the sake of example, this here is the front of the shirt. Now you'll notice, if I pull this up to myself, there's really no way to make this thing look like it's all one shirt. That's because it's not. This is only half of the front of the shirt. You see this right here is the little neck hole. This is where the shoulder seam goes. But we've only got half of it. So that means we would have to cut out two of these and put them together. And if you cut them both out with the exact same orientation on the fabric, you will have effectively cut out two right sides. That doesn't really work. You'll have a you'll have a pretty side on one side of the shirt and an ugly side on the other. That's weird. Same thing goes with every other pattern piece. Sleeves are actually directional. There's a right sleeve and a left sleeve. So you would have to cut out one of each, because nobody really has two left arms. If you do, please don't be offended. I didn't mean it. And can I shake your hand? So that's, and the pieces will actually tell you, and I will show you on the pieces, they tell you to cut to or cut on fold, and I will show you how all that works. But this folding the fabric in half and cutting it that way, you're actually cutting out both pieces you need at the same time, and they are correct. They're mirror opposites of one another because you're cutting on the ugly side of one and the pretty side of the other. Easy, right? Now then, there's one more really good reason to cut on the fold, and that is best explained by the pattern piece itself. If you look up here at this straight edge and this funny little arrow, that, as well as the fact that it says center fold, indicates that this piece needs to be cut on the fold. That is because this pattern piece right here is not really the size of the sleeve. The sleeve itself is actually twice this size. Yay for big puffy sleeves! Isn't that so romantic and wonderful? And now, when a pattern piece needs to be cut on the fold, it will indicate with this sort of thing. It'll say center fold. Some of them say cut on fold. But that's how you know that this needs to be put on a fold. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the selve edge to the center line of our fold, thereby creating a new fold that I can then put my pattern piece on. Yay, there we go. See, we have plenty of room to fit it in there. It's on the fold, and then we still have all this other fabric that just draped off the side of the table that we can use to fold for the other sleeve. And then we will have two sleeves. Isn't that wonderful? Now, before we actually pin our pattern piece to our fabric, we need to, of course, make sure that it's all lined up on the fold like it needs to be, and we need to make sure that both the fabric and the pattern piece are nice and flat. And you will see me doing that pretty regularly throughout this process, because it is very important to have no wrinkles or puckers or ripples or anything in there, because that will change the final shape of the pattern piece, which will make sewing it a real nuisance. Now then, we can start pinning, and you probably saw me just poke myself. Now when you pin, you'd think, how difficult is it to pin? You push the pin through the pattern piece and both pieces of fabric, both layers of the fabric. Then you turn it and come back through all the layers. That seems like a really obnoxiously simple step to take the time and point out, but you might be surprised at what some folks just have not figured out yet, so don't judge. Now, we pin the pattern piece down. There we go, we've got our pattern piece pinned. Now for the cutting. And cutting, you would think, is fairly straightforward, and for the most part it is, but I'm going to point out a few things that are important to know as we cut. Now, staying as close as you can. Look here, you got no business intruding. All right, stay as close as you can to the printed edge of the pattern, because that will make it easier to put together. Now you see all these little triangles, all these little arrows, darts, tabs, whatever you'd like to call them. Those are actually important, so you don't want to just cut right on by them like they're nothing. This is how you know how the thing goes together. If you have done or seen any of the Pepakura armor, works exactly the same way. So, and now you can cut in to the pattern. I prefer to cut out like this and make a little dart sticking out. It's easier to see when you're working once you actually have the pattern piece cut out. It also avoids the problem of cutting into the pattern and then leaving a little hole in the seam, because these edges are all going to become seams when we start putting this garment together. and you really don't want to have gone through all the trouble to stitch up your seams and do everything really nice, and then when you put the thing on, you've got a hole somewhere because you cut your tab in instead of out. And now you will find places where there are more than one of those little tabs, and we'll probably come across those, and I will show them to you. I'll point them out and explain them as we get there, because there's a reason for them to all be different. Again, like the little pepakura thing, that helps you know how to put it together. Okay, here's another piece. This is the cuff that we are now cutting out, and I was extremely lazy when pinning this one. I folded everything in half and then folded it in half again, because see, this little guy needs us to cut 4 of the fabric, and rather than folding in half and cutting 2 and then finding another place to fold in half and cut 2, I just made a snowflake out of it, folded it all up on itself, and I'm cutting it all out at once. You can do that. Being lazy is okay. The biggest reason I wanted to point this out is because we have 2 of those little tab things right there, and that is important. I mentioned that being something significant. The way I cut these out, you can cut out and out if you want. Again, I'm in favor of more efficient use of my time and self, so I just make a double wide dart or tab like that. So see, it's a little bit wider and it doesn't have the point. That's just how I do it to designate for myself, oh, this stuff's being aggravating, to designate for myself where that is and what's going on with it. Okay, so that's the sleeves and the cuffs, and you'd think that's all we really need for the sleeves, and it is. It really, that's all that the sleeves have going on with them, but there is one more piece that I am going to cut out of this piece of fabric, and it may not make sense right at first, although I'm sure some of you may get a bit of a chuckle. The collar. I'm going to be cutting the collar out of this piece of fabric, and now I know exactly why that wouldn't make sense. If the cuff needs to be the same fabric as the sleeve, then surely the collar should be the same fabric as the body, because they're the 2 pieces that touch. Not really. It is best, especially with gentlemen's clothing, for the cuffs and the collar to match. And all you have to do is look at some of the fancier menswear that have some kind of crazy blue striped button-up shirt and then plain white cuff and collar. There you go. The cuff and the collar really need to be the same thing. Before I actually do what I'm doing, let me explain, I'm sorry. If I'm lining up this piece of fabric with this other piece of fabric, go all the way, we run out of fabric. Oh, whoa. This is bad. So what we have to do is be a little bit sneaky with our fabric. We've got it folded, which means we essentially have twice as much fabric right here than we see. Now, this collar, we need to cut 2 of fabric, right? So we need 2 out of these things out of not enough fabric. How on earth is that going to work? Well, the collar is really, really helpful in that it gives us this line right here, the center back. That is the center of the back of the collar, such that if you were to fold this thing perfectly in half, you have 2 totally symmetrical halves of the collar. And you know what's great about that? If we can fold the pattern in half and it's perfectly symmetrical on both sides, then the same thing works for the fabric. We can just line this center line up with the fold, and now we have enough fabric. It will fit. And there's even enough room, if we do it right, it'll be close, to have both come out the same way. Ta-da! Yay, it's magic! So that's everything that's got to come out of the sleeve material. Now I am pulling out the body material, this nice, easy to work with white broadcloth. And see, it's already folded for us. So we'll just work with that. And when I pull out the traced copy that I made, which is on tissue paper and works quite well, you'll see that we have cut one on fold. We made those notes for ourselves. And here's the fold over here. So we will just be lining that up on the fold like we did the sleeve and do everything exactly the same as we just did. Of course, being mindful of any of the little tabs that we need to see and remembering the size like we did before. Everything's exactly the same from here on. It's just the shape of the pattern that changes. That's all. And there you have it. Once you have all the pattern pieces cut out, go back and double check. Make sure that there aren't some that need to be cut out of the lining material as well, or interfacing, or some other kind of fabric. They'll do that. Again, they give you one pattern piece and you have to cut it out of multiple things multiple times. That just saves room in the envelope. So make sure you double check on the pattern piece itself. Each individual one will tell you whether it needs to be cut out of something else. Have one right here, as a matter of fact. Remember Mr. Cuff that we had to cut 4 of? Well, if you look a little bit closer, we also need to cut 2 out of the interfacing. Because I've got to cut 2 of these, and I am all for maximizing the use of my time, I'm just going to make a little fold over like that, because this stuff, if you'll notice, does not come folded on the bolt. It is only that wide. So we do not have a fold there to work with. In most cases, if you need to cut 2 out of a fabric, you only need to cut 1 out of interfacing. Like here, we need to cut 4 fabric, cut 2 interfacing. That's because the interfacing actually goes between the 2 pieces of fabric. And when we start putting these things together, you will see that. There we are. Quick, easy. And you'll notice I did take the 2 little tabs into account. You don't necessarily have to with interfacing, but it's more habit than anything else, so I do. There we are. Now we have all of our pieces cut out and ready to go. Next time we will be taking a look at the machine. Finally! I know, right? That's what you've all really been waiting for, is finally taking a look at that machine and getting to know it and what it's all about. Well, we will be. And don't worry, once we do, we can actually get started on the project because everything else will be set up and ready to go. Now, if you like what I'm doing, feel free to prove it by giving me a little thumbs up. If you want to know more about the things that we're doing here or get the regular updates when these videos are released, subscribe to the Devil May Care channel. And if this happens to be moving a little bit slower than you would like to, if you're wanting a little more content, a little more of the project itself and less of the basic stuff, hang in there. I'm working on a level 2 sewing series as well, so keep watching for that. And I'll see you next time.